Welcome, and thank you for choosing this video providing a brief introduction to a racially equity-minded approach to teaching and learning. Material for this video was taken in part from the Center for Urban Education, USC Rozier School of Education, known as CUE. Fresno City College enjoyed a 2-year partnership with CUE, out of which grew our Interdisciplinary Faculty Equity Lab, currently facilitated by me, Dr. Valentino, psychology instructor. As part of that partnership, we have permission to use their copyrighted materials. We've all done it, standing around the mailroom or sitting in the cafeteria, commiserating about our students, complaining that they don't read the material, don't do the homework, don't pay attention in class when they even come to class, don't use tutoring, etc. How we typically think about student success is to focus on student variables, such as motivation, commitment, discipline, and effort. But what if we thought about student success differently? What if we focused on the things that we have more control over, things we can approach with intention, things like faculty effort, faculty care, faculty responsibility, and institutional commitment, as reflected by institutional policies and values? John Hattie took a close look at over 65,000 studies of student achievement. Studies involved close to 250 million students. He then conducted a meta-analysis to create a measure of the relative significance of different educational factors. This analysis yielded an effect size, which allows us to get a strong sense of just how important a certain factor is. He categorized the factors, which are displayed in the pie chart. 50% of the variance in learning was attributed to student variables, 25% to teacher variables, 5% to peers, 5% to home, and 15% to other. It's important to note that he looked at students, including students from grades 1 through 14, so the other variables could be things like the elementary school principal or the community college financial aid policies and procedures. As a faculty member, I often ask myself if I am fully taking advantage of my part. Am I giving 100% in order to maximize my 25% of the pie? Fresno City College faculty and staff have been making strides toward higher success rates for our students. The overall success rates for both Fall 08 and Spring 09 was 64%. There has been a steady rise. The overall success rate for Fall 18 was 71%, and Spring 19 was 74%. It is typical for spring success to exceed the fall. The success rates by racial ethnic groups indicate an upward trend for all races. That's the good news. The bad news is that the gaps between racial groups have been maintained. Let's just consider the lowest group, African American, and the highest group, white. In the 2009-2010 academic year, there was a 20% difference between success for African Americans at 55% and for whites at 75%. 10 years later, there is still a 20% gap between African Americans at 62% and whites at 82%. These are the results of success for all efforts. They work, but they do not eliminate the gaps. What if we approach success in terms of racial equity? What if we focused on faculty awareness of racial identity and racialized patterns of outcomes? What if we focused on faculty reflection on racial consequences of taken for granted practices and interactions with racially minoritized students? What if faculty exercised agency to produce racial equity in their classrooms? Before we discuss the areas of agency, let's review the differences between equity, equality, and diversity. Equality imagines an equal world and is exemplified in the statement, "I care about all students equally." But the world isn't equal. Some students arrive at FCC with lots of social capital and a history of enriching, supportive educational experiences and resources. And the world has bias and systemic racism. Higher education has a history of focusing on diversity, exerting effort to ensure a diverse student body. However, a diversity lens focuses only on bringing more students into an unequal pathway. In contrast, equity redirects resources to the pathways with greatest need to fix barriers and intentionally provide support. Equity refers to the identification and removal of barriers that have prevented the full participation of historically marginalized and underrepresented student populations, with the goal of eliminating identified differences in outcomes between those populations and the student population as a whole. These are 5 areas that faculty can collect data to better understand how they are serving their minoritized students. So to answer the question, how well is your classroom culture serving your minoritized students? You can look to your curriculum and ask, do you design your course content to equitably represent your students' racial, ethnic identities? Do you invite students to incorporate their lived experiences and backgrounds into discussions and assignments? You can look to your classroom facilitation and ask, do you monitor your facilitation strategies to ensure equitable student participation? Do you structure hands-on engagement with course material? You can look to your interpersonal relationships and ask, do you pay attention to which students you interact with on a regular basis, by race, ethnicity, or to the students you encourage and celebrate? You can look to your rules and policies and ask, do you reflect on your classroom rules and policies and whether they undermine your efforts to create a classroom culture that is welcoming and caring, and whether they disproportionately impact minoritized racial ethnic groups? You can look to your values and beliefs and ask, do you reflect on your own values, beliefs, and cultural frameworks, the way they shape your classroom, and whether they have unintended equity implications for minoritized racial ethnic groups? By asking questions, we are intentional about not assuming we know the answer. Instead, we're starting from a point in which we want to learn and gather evidence in addition to your instructional level data. A deficit mindset puts focus on problems rather than potential. And we all know that those conversations in the mailroom and cafeteria seldom lead to solutions. Some examples of deficit-minded statements are, my Latinx students have families and jobs. They don't have time to do the work. African American students are not doing well because they don't value higher education. She wasn't prepared for this class. I knew she wasn't going to pass from the beginning. And they should all have access to a computer and reliable internet connection because that's what's required to attend college in this era. Equity-mindedness focuses on what we can do to remove barriers, foster student potential, and allow students to demonstrate their abilities. Examples of equity-minded questions are there specific assignments that Latinx students are not turning in that may be contributing to not passing the course? What messages are students receiving from me to convey high expectations, authentic care, and belief in their abilities? Do my course materials reduce stereotypes and value my students' lived experiences? And how might my class policies give a disadvantage to some students? Drs. Harris and Wood from the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement, CORA, warn us, we ignore the diversity we don't see. In our classrooms, this might mean students who identify as LGBTQIA, have disabilities, or have mental or physical health issues. If we are teaching online, it might also apply to race, ethnicity. When race, ethnicity is invisible, we are less likely to practice being racially equity-minded. Therefore, the effects of social stereotypes may be exacerbated online. For more information about the Interdisciplinary Faculty Equity Lab, which we call IFEL, or anything else in this video, please feel free to contact Dr. Ray Ramirez, Director of Student Equity and Success, or Dr. Marianne Valentino, Psychology Instructor. Thank you for choosing this video, providing a brief introduction to a racially equity-minded approach to teaching and learning.